Okay, well, thank you everyone for joining us on our Lunch and Learn Relax webinar titled Important IT Trends to Be Aware of in 2014. We have the phone set to mute, but now or during or near the end of the webinar, we'd really appreciate it if you guys would look at your control panel where you'll see a box. Should say either, yeah, I think it just says questions, as a matter of fact. We'd love for you to toss some questions at us. I'll be managing that and monitoring that, so go ahead and send it as you think of them. And we'll be asking Ari maybe as we move through, but definitely at the end of the webinar. So Ari, with that little intro and housekeeping in place, the floor is yours. Let's get started.
All right, thanks a lot, Kyle. I really appreciate it. I want to thank everybody who's participating today. We've been doing these webinars for 2 years now, and we've really focused historically on specific technical training items. For those of you who have attended a portion or all of the series, from Excel to Word, Outlook, PowerPoint, beyond, OneNote, we've done all kinds of things, and they've been extremely well received, and we certainly appreciate the ability to deliver this extra value to our clients. One of the things that we've been asking folks is other topics they would be interested in hearing about. One of the things that came back to us was just an overall idea of where IT was headed and some important topics within IT to be aware of and keep their eyes on. And so we decided to kick off our 2014 Lunch and Learn webinar series with a topic that just looks ahead. Talking about trends to be aware of in IT for 2014. And so we put together a really good slide deck here. We try to keep it fun and lighthearted, so there'll be a lot of pictures, but also a lot of good meat on the bones too. So as Kyle mentioned, please feel free to pile in any questions through the control panel, and we'll get to them probably towards the end or at the end. There is some interactive stuff during this webinar, so Kyle will be stopping, doing a couple polls to keep things going and get some feedback from you along the way. So let's get started. So the first trend I wanted to talk about for 2014 is having done some research, by the way, to kind of look at what different things have been happening and what we think are happening moving forward. We put together this list of some important trends. And I think the first one to talk about is bring your own device versus choose your own device. Or if you've been following along in any of the kind of industry rags, BYOD versus CYOD. And so for the last few years, probably since a lot of things changed when the iPhone was released. It started a little bit before that, but that's definitely increased the speed at which this was happening. There was a trend for people to bring devices into the office and want to get them connected to corporate email, corporate calendars, and so forth. And so iPhones, Androids, Windows phones, and when it started off in the BlackBerry in the early parts of 2000, that was really not something that was a product that was driven primarily by the business and not by end users. But this BYOD, or bring your own device, was really when we saw users bringing in devices and saying, please get me connected. It started with smartphones, and then it went to tablets, iPads, and Android tablets, and now Windows tablets, and so forth. And there was a lot of good reason for that. From a business perspective, right, that made a lot of sense. Sure, I can have, I might have 30 attorneys. They're now paying for their phones, bringing them in, asking them to be connected, and now we're going to get extra productivity outside of the workplace where they're going to be able to look at their calendar and respond to emails and so forth. And that's been happening across all of our client base, and it's really been escalating. It's extremely rare to not have people in every level of the organization, from the receptionist to the CEO, that have phones that are connected to email and so forth. And to the extent that the connectivity of the phones was limited to that type of thing, email and calendar, it really wasn't a problem. We have seen over time more and more challenges as people have become reliant on these phones, and then when they don't work, they come to IT to get support. And that's causing a lot of increased costs in IT. We're seeing a lot more interruption in people's workflow because they have to get their phones looked at. Maybe they have to go to Verizon or AT&T to get the phone fixed. Maybe they have to come to IT because different issues are arising. And as more and more phone apps become integrated beyond just email and calendar, right? Once the phone starts to run apps, that are beyond that, we believe that's going to only increase the cost of the organization by having a hodgepodge of different devices. Because now we're going to have to worry about the different applications working across platforms. And we're already starting to see that. We already have clients that have deployed dozens of tablets. And you're going to need, with applications that link back, whether it's to EMR or other database or sales applications, that having 5 different tablet versions is really an untenable situation. And so we're already seeing a push towards the next option, choose your own device. And I put a little picture up here of a Model T Ford because it reminded me of the old joke, right? You could get a Model T in any color you want as long as that color is black. And I think that's the direction that we're seeing IT headed. It's going to really start, we believe, more heavily in 2014 and only increase in the years beyond that as we see more applications getting pushed to mobile devices. It might be a little bit better, right, than just any Model T you want, any color you want, as long as it's black. Depending on the platform, right? So if you go with the iPhone, right, that's probably going to be your only option. If you decide to standardize on Android phones, you might have 2 or 3 different models that people could choose from that use the same software but have a different hardware form factor. And we think that's going to be similar with tablets, that we're going to see a lot more integration there. And so we believe that the standardization component of the devices is going to be delivering more value to the organizations than allowing people to choose their own devices. So I think, to bring their own device. Yeah.
Can we toss this poll? If we could toss this poll in, I think now would be a good time.
Sure.
If I can, now that we got kind of the definition of both the BYOD and the CYOD, the poll question, if we get you guys' participation, is: do you have a written bring your own device or choose your own device policy in your organization? Yes or no? Do you have a written BYOD or CYOD policy in your organization? Give it about 5 more seconds here. All right, so there's your results, Ari.
Wow, look at that. So, I mean, again, that I think goes more to the point that this whole bring your own device thing has just sort of been thrust upon organizations. It hasn't been so much planned. I think an 11% yes versus 89% no tells the story. And this is not uncommon. I mean, we see this this is what we're seeing, and I think that's why this is an important topic and something that we are thinking about as IT professionals. We're hoping to bring to our clients, and something that we think you should be thinking about in terms of these devices. And I do want to. So it's really the BYOD, CYOD. I also have a little bonus topic on this slide. Another big thing that we're doing now is mobile device management, or MDM. As more information has been on these devices, more secure and private information, the ability to manage these devices, to know where they are, be able to remotely wipe them, guarantee that people have passwords on their devices, which is crucial, guarantee that encryption is enabled on those devices, also an important topic. That is becoming a bigger and bigger deal. And that links back to BYOD and CYOD. So if you want to deploy mobile device management solution, an MDM solution, and you have to cover 10 different types of devices, that's going to be a more complicated and more expensive system than if you only have 1 or 2 different types of devices.
And you just hit on some of the main reasons there: the security, the passwords. I mean, if my iPhone gets stolen, gets lost, right, and I don't have that password, the amount of data that these phones can carry in each of our businesses is pretty amazing. That's where this
Absolutely.
BYOD and CYOD becomes so important.
No doubt, no doubt. And I think we're going to start seeing people want to access data on their mobile devices. They want to be able to see and now even edit documents. And now we're seeing releases of secure file sync technology, not using unsecure solutions like Dropbox, which is a real security risk. So if you are doing that, I suggest we talk to you about it. But there are going to be secure file sync tools. And once that happens, you're going to have iPhones, iPads, Windows, and Surface tablets that are walking around with real client data on it. And I think that's going to need to be protected. And one other bonus point while I have you here is that there are now options for getting phones without 2-year contracts that are much less expensive. So that's a huge problem, right? So as an organization, I go and buy phones, and now I'm hooked for 2 years, whether I want to keep the phone with that person keeps working with me. So that was a huge risk. But there's legitimate companies. There's a company called Boost Mobile, for instance, that uses the Sprint network. So it's pretty good coverage, right? It's not as good as Verizon or AT&T, but it's pretty good coverage, especially in metropolitan areas. Hartford and Hartford County is pretty well covered, Boston, New York, et cetera, where you can get a phone with a data plan unlimited for $55 a month instead of the $120 you're normally paying with AT&T. Right, so the difference is you pay for the device up front. So instead of a $200 iPhone, right, it's a $600 iPhone, but you're saving $60 a month over a 2-year contract. So you could save $900 on the cost of that phone over a 2-year period, just by going with a situation like that. So, again, maybe the coverage doesn't work for you, but what's great about owning the phone is you can always move to another platform. You can shut it off at any time, and you can also switch it to somebody else, so another person. So those are some kind of neat things that are out there that I think are going to be pushing the choose your own device, because the cost to companies to provide the devices are going to come way down. There's sharing plans that you can look at. So that might be something interesting to look at. And I believe with the advent of these different plans, Verizon, AT&T, the major carriers, are going to be forced to start offering these plans. In fact, if you go to Verizon right now, they're now selling the devices directly, and I believe there's a small discount on the monthly rate. It's still not enough to offset. It still doesn't make sense on Verizon. It's still cheaper to sign the contract. But I think with these other companies nipping at their heels and those smaller companies' coverage maps expanding, it's only a matter of time before we see them offering those savings. So that's something to look at in 2014, I believe. Okay, second trend to look at for 2014, process automation. So one of the things I want to talk about in the process automation is I recently bought a house in West Hartford. So heretofore, I've lived in a high-rise building, and we had garbage service and didn't really have to worry about that. But I come to West Hartford, and I find out that you have to use a very specific garbage can. So why is that? And I did some research on it, and come to find out that the reason that they've done that is this garbage can and the recycling, by the way, as well. When they come by, these garbage cans are automatically hooked up to a truck, and they dump right in, right? So I'm home last week, and I'm watching these garbage truck come by, and I'm realizing that there's one guy on this truck. There's one guy on the truck picking up all the garbages for this entire neighborhood. And I think back to what it was like when I was growing up, and you get the garbage truck coming by, right? And there'd usually be 2 guys on the back of the truck plus 1 guy driving the truck. 3 guys on the same truck picking up all this trash. And so, I'm doing some quick math, and I'm thinking, well, say garbage men, unionized, probably pretty well paid. Maybe these guys are costing $60,000 a year on this truck. So I got to buy the truck, and I'm spending $180,000 on people to man the truck, right? Well, someone obviously looked at this and said, hey, we can get a better garbage pail. We can get a better garbage truck. We can reduce our ongoing cost to just have 1 guy on the truck and and just automate that whole process. Now, you're probably going to pay that 1 guy a little bit more than the other 2 guys. So let's say instead of $60,000, this 1 guy, he just gets a 30% increase, right? So he's at $80,000 a year now, but you take 2 guys off the truck. So instead of $180,000, this truck is now $80,000 in labor costs, and that $100,000 goes to pay down the truck. So pretty quickly, you're in the black on that investment. And that just blew my mind, right? So immediately I started thinking to myself, if trash pickup can be helped by automation, what opportunities are we missing in our organization?
Or you just gave everybody a sneak peek into your life. I mean, now they're imagining, you're just sitting at home and you have nothing better to do other than watch the garbage truck and then brainstorm the economics and the process behind that for the next 30 minutes. But it's a great analogy. It's a great analogy.
Let's pretend I only spent 30 minutes on that. But in any case, this is something that we've seen over and over, process automation, and it's something that for a long time, right? There's no surprise that in manufacturing, that process automation has been something that's been impacting and affecting manufacturing for decades, right? So that's nothing new there. But in terms of service businesses, whether that's healthcare, legal, accounting, consulting, recruiting, whatever it is, automation is really everywhere. And this was just an example that just struck me, and I thought would be great to include in the webinar. But we know that process automation is absolutely crucial. And one of the things that we're seeing, right, if you're looking at the slide on the screen now, there's upward pressure on pricing. there's upward pressure on salaries, there's upward pressure on utility costs even. Look, I'm just reading an article last week that natural gas to New England's going up 3 times because the demand is increasing, but the pipes to supply it aren't there. I mean, things outside of our control are pushing up prices. And I wanted to tell one quick story that's just, I think, illustrates this point, which is in our business at IT Direct, there is a huge amount of upward pressure on IT salaries. There's a tremendous demand for IT positions across all industries. Certainly in what we're doing, there's a huge demand for this type of labor. And so as a result, pricing is going way up. And so how do I combat that? Because on the flip side and the right side of this slide, clients want us to keep prices down. Right? I understand that. I'm a client. I buy tons of stuff. I want to keep prices down. And so we're in that conundrum of things outside of IT Direct's control are working, conspiring even to push prices up, but we just can't raise our rates to meet that demand. And so we've had to look at what we can automate, and we've been doing that. And so you've probably seen these different cloud services that we've been releasing over the last few years. Our worry-free backup, worry-free mail filter. Last year we added on antivirus, worry-free remote management we've been doing for a few years. In the second half of last year, we rolled out our worry-free disaster recovery. And these cloud services are designed to automate and reduce the labor needs on a ton of different services that we're offering. And so even though we've been growing as an organization and hiring people, we've been looking at ways to be able to do work that maybe took 4 people and just doing it with 3 people. What can we do to automate so that our worry-free remote management product can actually fix some of the problems that we're detecting on your networks rather than have to deploy a human resource to go and do that. And so we've been able to try and keep up with the upward pressure on salary by hiring fewer people and automating more. And by the way, these aren't just products that we're recommending that our clients use. We internally use all of these products. We were one of the first to be on the worry-free disaster recovery. We see the value of it so that we don't have to spend time in our office dealing with our own IT needs, but we still have all of our services available to serve you, right? We can't afford to be the cobbler's kids without any shoes, because if our computers stop working, we can't deliver any service to you guys. And so we're working hard to live and breathe this automation, and we believe that this is a huge trend in 2014 that we need to be looking at with all of our clients. Where can you automate processes? Where can you leverage technology to be able to do more with the same people that you have? And I know people like to use that cliche, more with less. I think the more with less sounds negative to me, right? Because it's really not more with less, right? It's more with more, right? We're putting in more systems, but we're increasing the value of the people. And I think the same is true in the garbage example, right? The one guy that mans the truck, he has to be a little bit smarter, he has to be a little bit more organized, he has to be a little bit more timely than the team of 3 had to be, right? So he's going to get paid a little bit more, but as overall, the system costs less, right? And now as a taxpayer in West Hartford, I'm fully supportive of that, right? Because I want to keep my property taxes down. And that just, I think, translates to all of our businesses. So that's a second trend, process automation. We really need to be looking at process automation. Trend number 3, infrastructure redundancy. So let's talk about the whys of that. So historically, right, there has been a need, and for a long time, we've relied on computers and email and so forth to be able to do the work that we do. But there was plenty of jobs with industries that we work with, and I'm just using a medical example here. Let's take nursing, right? So for a long time, yeah, sure, nurses maybe did some emails, did some reports on the computers, but the day-to-day and the core interaction with patients didn't, for a long time, involve any computers. But those days are over, right? Right now, with our clients that have medical, long-term care, short-term care, acute care, even with our dentists seeing patients, for instance, they literally can't even take an x-ray if the computers are down. We have places that can't dispense medication if the computers are down, because the machine that dispenses the pills, you have to put in a code to be able to get it to dispense the pill. If the computer's down, you can't even give patients medication. I mean, the basics of these jobs can't be done if the computers aren't working. And so we think about historically, right, we're looking at mirrored hard drives, right? So obviously in reality there's no mirror, right? But there's two different drives, right? And everyone's probably familiar or has heard that term mirrored hard drives. And that's what we used to think about in redundancy, right? For well into a decade, we've been giving every single server, right, has mirrored hard drives, has redundant power supplies, you know, two connections to the network, right? All that's kind of been a standard. But what we're seeing now is a move to redundant infrastructure, right? Two entirely different server setups, right? The deployment of storage area networks, or SANs, you may have heard of, where you can have 2 or 3 different servers all working on shared storage. You've got storage redundancy, power redundancy, server redundancy, network redundancy, right? So that, you know, that reminds me of that old Timex commercial, right? Takes a licking and keeps on ticking. That's what we need from our infrastructure, because the costs of being down are so high now that it's worth the investment. And so whereas, you know, clients of ours that had 75, 100 employees have been doing this in past years, or most of them have, we believe 2014 is the year that everyone's going to be doing it. That we need to have secondary servers available, or the ability to spin up your servers on secondary hardware. Spin up meaning just sort of run them in a virtual environment, so that you can access it, so that to the end user, whether that be whether that be an attorney, an accountant, payroll processing clerk, a nurse, what have you, that the systems are up and running all the time, because we just can't afford to have them down. The costs are just too high. And supporting this type of redundancy has been the ability to leverage the cloud, which we're going to talk about shortly. But I just want to introduce this slide. This is a slide I found at gigaom.com, which really just talked about the decreasing price of bandwidth, internet bandwidth. And this sort of compares across international areas, so you could see that it's been going down globally, right? And even the US, you look at New York in about 2005, where you're looking at about an average of $30 per megabit per month. We're down below 10 in most cases now. So you're talking about a 60% decrease over 5 years in pricing. That's just amazing.
And it's only continued over the last 3 years.
Oh yeah, I mean, it's just unbelievable now. And I think that decrease in price has led to another thing, which is redundant internet, right? We've got the orange on the left, the blue on the right, just sort of trying to indicate that we need redundant internet. It's not just enough to have one internet. Email is so crucial. The ability to access cloud applications, so crucial. And with that decreasing price of internet bandwidth, there's no excuse not to have 2 internets. I mean, it's so critical. It's so important. The price has been going down. It's just definitely out there. And that's just really a reminder. That's really more of a trend probably that started in 2012. I don't think we have too many clients anymore that don't have redundant internet.
Well, before you talk and before you assume that, I'm launching this poll. So we have another quick poll here. Do you have multiple internet connections to your office?
Come on, yes. Come on, yes. I normally don't root for these polls, but
you're rooting. You might be a little disappointed, sir. You're at the if there's a bunch of no's here, you're gonna have to sell the reasons why and how it works, right? Ooh.
Oh no.
I'm gonna close it before it flips the other way here. 3, 2, 1. It's 50-50.
Well, 50. That's surprising. So we definitely have some work to do. That I'm a little surprised, to be honest.
Won't you take a minute to explain how the redundant internet, works, and just hit on the benefits again?
Yeah. So redundant internet is simply bringing in a second internet connection, so that if one connection goes down, you still have access to the internet through another connection. And there's so many different ways to skin that cat. In many cases, the availability of DSL is there. Now, DSL is awfully slow, and we don't want to use that in almost every case as our primary method of internet, unless we absolutely have to. But the reality is that you could bring in a DSL circuit for like $40 a month, $40 a month, and have backup internet, so that at least there's some way to get online, send and receive emails. I mean, I'd venture to say that in most cases, if you ask people, what would you rather not have for a day, your phone or your email? Well, maybe it'd be 50-50, but I mean, certainly with the people I'm talking to, you know, they can't imagine living without email for a day. I mean, with the phone, it's tough. But so much business is transacted, contracts are sent, revised, information exchange via email. Man, it's tough to live without email. So I got a note here, Kyle. I got an action item. I got to follow up with the 50-50 and find out. I'm hoping that some people just didn't know they had it, but you never know. So we'll definitely look into that. But I think redundant infrastructure. That should be redundant servers, redundant storage, ability to keep that stuff up and running both locally and redundant internet is going to be really important, which dovetails nicely into the fourth trend I wanted to talk about, which is cloud disaster recovery. So let's just talk about, really briefly, I just want to talk about the difference between cloud backup and cloud disaster recovery. So cloud backup is when the files that you have are copied to the cloud. So just the files, right? Not the actual server software, the applications, but the data itself is copied up to the cloud. Now that was sort of a great first step, and if you didn't have a lot of fast internet, that would have been enough, right? Because it would have been too much internet, too much bandwidth to be able to copy everything up to the internet every single night. So that was a big struggle. But I think, and I'm just gonna not to be redundant here, but kind of based back on this same graph, right, the ever-dropping prices of internet speed and therefore the ever-increasing speed of internet, in sort of preparation for this webinar, Kyle and I were talking, you can get a 100 megabit internet circuit from Comcast. Now it's a cable, so it's not the same thing, but for $199. I mean, that just really blows my mind because I was just thinking back to 1999 when I installed a fractional T1. So that would have been 1/4 of 1 megabit. So we're talking about 100 megabits for $199, and I installed 1/4 of 1 megabit for, I believe at the time, it was $1,200 a month. So this just amazes me kind of where we've come to. And so I think with that ever decreasing speed, we now can copy not just files, but the entire infrastructure of your organization to the cloud so that in the event that something happens, not just to the building, sure it could burn down, sure your server room can get wet, all that stuff definitely can and does happen. In fact, we had a client, I'm reminded, that was on the like 22nd floor, I want to say, of a high-rise office building, and you would think, oh, well, there would never be a flood. Well, meanwhile, something happened to the sink upstairs, bada bing, bada boom, the upstairs floor flooded, that dipped through the ceiling, obviously into theirs, and flooded their entire conference room, right, and ruined a conference room, a huge oak conference room table. Now, that all got insured and it got taken care of, right, and they have multiple conference rooms, so probably no harm or not too much harm, not too much foul. But imagine if that had happened over their server room, right? No one ever thinks you're going to ever get a flood in your server room when you're in the 24th floor or whatever of a high-rise building, but it can happen. Strange things can happen. And I mean, I'm sure we all remember the Snowmageddon or whatever they were calling it a couple Octobers ago. You know, we had clients that were out without power for 2 weeks. And so being able to spin up in the cloud, I think is really important. Security, I know, is a huge concern that folks have when we talk about cloud backup, cloud disaster recovery. But security has come a really long way in terms of the encryption. When you use enterprise-level cloud services, right, not Dropbox, but enterprise-level cloud services, not only is your data encrypted on the trip, right, not only is sort of the tunnel encrypted, but the data is encrypted at the storage location, right? So we can't see your data. Right, the people in the data center, they can't see your data, right? Our data center stuff, like IT Direct's data center, we rent some space in a data center in Waterbury, for instance. That we have our own lock, right? So I mean, there's just so much security going on, and I laugh because we've probably all heard the stories, right? There was a state of Connecticut employee, I think it was Department of Revenue Services, went on vacation to Long Island last year, or the year before. They had their work laptop in the car, which had information on it of taxpayer social security numbers, and someone broke into the car and stole the laptop. So, you know, sometimes I think we worry about the wrong things, but security has been paramount in cloud services, and when used correctly, I think it can really do some tremendous things. And so with a decrease in bandwidth, an improvement in backup technology, which I'm going to touch on now, but there's been so much movement in backup software over the last few years that now what we call bit-based backup, right, BIT, bit-based backup, has really become mainstream. And I think in 2014, we're going to even see that rolling out. It's going to really hit that tipping point to where the old backup technologies are really going to be going away. And so what is bit-based backup? So for those non-technical people on this webinar, I'm going to give a kind of an example. So if you're writing a Word document, let's say your Word document's about 100 kilobytes. It doesn't matter what a kilobyte is, but it's basically a measure of how big a file is, right? So if you change a word inside that document and you save it, in the old days, a backup software would go and it'd have to back up the whole 100 kilobytes, right, to get that file backed up. Well, the new software is so much more intelligent that it can see that you only modified a word inside of that Word document, and it will just back up maybe those 8 bytes or those 8 bits that you changed. So you could see how there's a dramatic decrease, right, in the amount of data that needs to be backed up, which allows us to do 2 critical things. One, back up much more frequently, right? Instead of the once a night backup, we're backing up every 30 minutes. And 2, it allows us to off-site that across this internet much more effectively. And so with the combination of those 2 things, we really see cloud disaster recovery taking off in 2014. It really started to take off in 2013. And we believe 2014 is really going to be the tipping point. And so that was our fourth trend for 2014 and what we would see there. Trend number 5, hybrid cloud. So cloud's been being talked about for a long time, and certainly it's been sort of hot, the idea of going to the cloud. But I think what people are starting to understand is that the cloud isn't one size fits all, right? We can't just have one pair of shoes that's going to fit every one single feet, right? It's going to be what works for your organization and how is that going to be customized. And so a combination of cloud and on-site of different services and different things, we see that as the real takeoff trend in 2014. One of the sort of things I've been talking about repeatedly in this webinar was the decreasing cost and so increasing availability of high-speed internet bandwidth. And that's all very true, and that has been part of the story. But let's take everything into perspective. So I had mentioned that you can get a 100 megabit internet circuit from Comcast for about $200, right? So that's not it's a cable service, right? So it's not the most reliable service like fiber internet, right? So for fiber it'd be a lot more expensive for 100 megabits. But let's just take that number, $200. There is still a huge differential between the speeds you're going to get at that 100 megabits and what you can get inside of your network. And so let me kind of illustrate that so we can sort of understand this and why I think the hybrid is the trend versus all to the cloud. Right now, the standard network inside a company is gigabit speeds. And so we've worked with a lot of you over the last few years to upgrade to gigabit speeds. And that's definitely the standard or de facto standard in all networks, right? And gigabit is 1,000 megabits, right? So let's just take at IT Direct, say we have 26 employees. Every single person's computer has a gigabit, 1,000 megabit connection back to our main server room. And then that server has multiple connections and we have multiple servers, so to everyone. So we're getting, pretty close to that 1,000 megabit speed per user. So that's a lot of bandwidth, right? Even if we were to bring in a 100 megabit circuit, which is admittedly extremely fast, anything that we were doing on the internet, all 26 people need to share that circuit. So not only is the speed getting cut by a factor of 10, right? It's going to be, instead of 1,000, 100. We also have to split that. Instead of everyone getting 1,000, it's 100 divided by 26. And so you could see very quickly that it's hard to compete with those speeds. And so there's some applications that we use that require and run much faster when we have a faster connection. And so, that's the stuff that we're keeping in-house, right? There's also some things that,
And by in-house you mean just on our in-house server and connected directly to that versus cloud and internet.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. Yep. And that's a great point. And so I think that, different organizations have different needs, have different potential applications, different ways to use those applications. And so I think it's got to be the right mix, but it also needs to be organized. And so I put together this slide, which I had mentioned earlier about buying a house and moving. And so for those of you who have done that, and we had to do some remodeling, some wheelchair accessibility and so forth, and sort of looking at going from one space to another space, we want to design it right. And one of the things that I've been educated on, and my wife's been helping me educate on, is that just because I like two things doesn't mean that they should go in the same room together. And so you'll notice in this slide in the top left is like a hodgepodge organization of design, right, with like a little gas fireplace over an open window with a glass table, two different styles of chairs, versus, and you can sort of see the disorganization, the clutter, just kind of not looking great, versus the bottom right, which has a similar design element and feel, but all the pieces kind of work together. And I think that's really the trick of the hybrid cloud, right? We can look at any one cloud service and any one in-house service, and they might be great, but do they work well together? And I think that is going to be the key in 2014 with the hybrid cloud, is not just are we using it, but are we using the applications that work well together? Not the one size fits all, but the size that fits us. And if we're going to be organizations that leverage technology to have an advantage in what we're doing, then I think we need to have an organized and cohesive design, because ultimately when it's not cohesive, it doesn't work right, it requires more support, there's more organizational friction, and we lose the benefits that we're investing in trying so hard to get. And so that's something that I'm working really hard to educate the folks here at IT Direct about, so that we can go ahead and help implement this in your organizations. And so we're working really hard on that, trying to still keep our finger on the pulse of the nuts and bolts, right? And looking at things like the Windows XP end of life that's coming up with Server 2003 next year, and the infrastructure upgrades. And so we're trying to look at all that. But it's become a mantra here that anytime we look at a project, we're asking ourselves, what cloud services could work for this client? How could it help them? What would that be? And there's just some benefits there. So I think it's a huge trend for 2014.
Question for you, Ari.
Yeah.
Is you talked about the house, is any Boston Red Sox stuff making its way into the design of the house, or does that have to stay at your office?
It's all coming to the office. Full control of the office, though. Yeah, looking great in the office.
I didn't know if that made the cut as you guys are designing.
Yeah. No, I don't think there's going to be a Red Sox room at the house. So.
Ouch. All right.
All right, and trend number 6, which is the last trend that we're going to talk about this afternoon, is data-driven businesses. I think that we had touched on this a little bit earlier about when it comes down to process automation, but there's so many different things that we can do to invest in process automation. Different things like monitoring, data management, tracking. I mean, this is just sort of talking from the IT Direct perspective, right? But tracking where we're spending time, right? Where do we spend time with our clients? Where's our billable time going? Where's our in-house time, right? So we've graduated here at IT Direct from a model where only the people who were client-facing track their time, to where now everybody, myself, the purchasing assistants, like our account support team, everyone is tracking their time, so we can sort of see, and that's, by the way, integrated into the system that we do our work in, right? So it kind of works on that workflow, and that allows us to generate data, to generate reports, and see where time is being spent. And I think that that is going to be a huge push in 2014. Because I believe truly, just from what I'm seeing both here and in what I'm studying, that the teams and the companies that are successful are the ones that rely on data, right? And I mean, Super Bowl weekend coming up, and so I'll talk a little bit about the Super Bowl, but if you watch and you listen to, like, Bill Belichick, right? So New England Patriots, not to be partisan about it, but sort of listen to those guys. Peyton Manning, right? What do they always say about him? He's smart in football. And how do they do that? They study the data. You ever notice if you watch a football game, in between offensive times on the field, you'll see the quarterback sitting on the sideline with a printout, a picture that they took of formations, of defenses, that game that they're printing out and looking at, right? That's technology at work, right? They're using technology to help get the data to decide what they're doing on the football field. And if they're doing it in football, if they're using data to decide what to do in football, is there any excuse that office jobs can't be doing that? And we have clients that are working in manufacturing and enterprise resource planning or ERP applications. That's been the de facto standard for years, right? Tracking where all of the materials are, waste elimination. In fact, just tell you another story. I was at an entrepreneurs organization that I'm involved in. I was at a meeting there, and I met a guy who, believe it or not, exports. He jokes around, he exports trees, but he exports tons, literally tons and tons of lumber out to Haiti, Dominican Republic, from the U.S. There's these whole tree farms I didn't even know about, but in North Carolina down into Texas. And anyway, they export all this stuff. And he was telling me that using computers, right, so think about when you're cutting a tree. Most trees don't go straight. They actually have a little bend in the trunk. And so what happens is when they're cutting this lumber, there used to be a ton of waste, right? Because the saw cuts straight, but the tree bends. So when you're cutting out the 2x4s or whatnot, you end up with the bend of the tree that's off. Well, they now have computers that scan the trunk, look at the bend in the trunk, and the saw now actually turns so that it gets the more 2x4s. And then when you stack them, they're so heavy, it makes them straight again. And they were able to capture like an extra 20% of lumber off the same amount of trees just by creating this new thing. And so I'm thinking to myself, we need to be as efficient when it comes down to our people. Our waste isn't lumber, our waste is time. And so what can we do to track that time? And it all starts with process automation to have the data, and then data-driven business, the ability to report on that data so we can make good decisions. Because in my view, the key for good decisions is solid information. And I believe that you've probably read these articles about big data and all that. I think that if it's good enough for Google to mine data, it's good enough for us to mine data. And so I believe that's a big trend and a big push, and something that we'd like to see our clients starting to take advantage of, because the sooner you start getting the data, the sooner you can make those decisions, right? Because the key is starting. The data is not going to generate itself. It takes time and effort to get it and then report on it.
Even in IT Direct's case, right? It was several years back, but each year, each quarter, there's something new that we're tracking, that we're doing data on. Talk a little bit more on the process automation, the data-driven business. If I'm a law firm, if I'm a CPA company, if I'm a consulting company, if I'm in healthcare, where do we start when we start thinking of, okay, process automation, data-driven business? Where do they start? What are some of the questions they should be asking? What are some of the first steps? Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, that's a great question, Kyle. I mean, I think the first step to do is to sit down, right, and think about what options are out there for tracking the work that you do, right? So I would start, right, by contacting my industry group. So, for instance, I know there's like a CPA association for Connecticut, right? I think it's like the I can't remember the acronym, but every organization has one, right? So if you're a small medical office, there's like the Medical Office Managers Association, I know, and reaching out to them and finding out what are some software vendors that are out there, or heck, reach out to IT Direct. We can help you connect with some of that stuff, right? Your technical account manager can help direct you in that area. And I would seek out some different software vendors and see who's out there developing software that is targeted at my industry. And then I would start evaluating what those things can do for us. Because, my recommendation is, especially at the organizations of the size that we are, trying to invest in custom software is probably not the way to go, right? So it's very expensive to maintain. And I think you're going to leverage a lot more by looking at customizing something off the shelf. And there's tons of stuff out there. I mean, you mentioned law firms as one option. There are a huge number of softwares out there that are available for law firms that can help them automate processes. And look, there's a ton of reasons not to do these things, but we will not survive as organizations if we don't adapt. We have to adapt, and we have to learn how to leverage these things to make our systems work better so that we can do more with the people that we have. We can increase the value not only to our clients, but to our employees as well. Did I answer that? Was that like a lot of talking and not an answer?
No, that was good.
I just think, just to circle back, industry groups, your IT Direct Technical Account Manager is a great resource. I would collect some data on what software is out there, and then we can be a great resource to help you evaluate how that software is going to be integrated with what you currently have, right? Because you might run into something, hey, this software looks great, and there's another software that looks as good, but which one is more compatible with the infrastructure that you have, right? Because that's going to be a big part of it. These things have a cost.
Great.
Does that make sense?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
All right. Well, that was it. We did our 5 trends. We covered bring your own device versus choose your own device. We covered process automation and how that's going to be a big impact. Infrastructure redundancy was trend number 3, not just mirrored hard drives, but also looking at redundant internet, redundant servers, redundant storage, and really making it so your systems are available all the time. Trend number 4 we talked about was cloud disaster recovery and where we can go with that and how that's going to really be a crucial thing to look at in 2014. And we talked about hybrid cloud, right? Not a one-size-fits-all model, but the idea that we should be looking at the cloud in all different ways and how that can integrate with what we're doing. So hybrid cloud was trend 5. And then trend number 6, we just talked about the data-driven business, where we can get that data and how that can work for us. So, any questions?
Excellent. Well, I asked a few questions as we were moving along there. If you guys want to pull up your control panel and toss a few questions or comments into the box. Or as you're doing that, if you wanted to also answer this question of mine, it's a favorite that I like to ask at these webinars. If you were to describe this webinar in one word, or maybe a couple words, what would it be? So you guys can answer that. Everybody can answer that. And then if you guys have some questions, that would be great as well. So you said, it'd be nice if I only spent a half an hour analyzing that garbage truck. What was the reality? I mean, did you just get sidetracked for a whole day on that?
Well, I started doing research, and you got to read about it. I got to do some searching. I don't know. It was just fascinating. It just fascinated me. I just happened to be pulling out of the driveway when the truck was coming down the street. So, it's funny, right? So when you're living in a high-rise building and you basically have a trash room and a chute on your floor, you just don't ever think about how that gets from the chute to like a landfill, right? I mean, it just wasn't in my daily thought process. So.
There we go. We got a question here. The question is, what is the difference between an Android and the iPhone, tablets versus iPads? If you want to speak to that a little bit. So
talk about the differences between an iPhone, an Android phone, and an iPad or an Android tablet?
Correct.
So, I mean, so there's the initial, I guess, so there's a couple differences. So the first one is going to be, there'll be a difference in the actual physical makeup of the device. So, the Apple has their certain way they've designed the device, and then Android devices will be designed differently. The biggest reason why there's so many differences is that Android is software. So Google has taken an Android phone operating system and licensed that to, actually I don't even know if they license it or do it for free, but it's on a lot of different hardware platforms, right? So you can get a Motorola phone that's powered by Android, you get an LG phone that's powered by Android. There's a lot of different phones so that they come in different sizes. Samsung makes an amazing phone, right? The Galaxy, a lot of people have been talking about that. And so you can get a Galaxy with a much bigger screen, for instance, than an iPhone. But the key difference is that it runs Android software versus the Apple iOS software. So it's just a different user interface, if you will. And then as a result of that, different physical platform. So that's kind of the core differences, but they're different applications, right? So it's like in the old days, does this run on a Mac or does it run on a PC? It's the same type of thing, right? When I make an application for an iPhone, that does not work on an Android. I'd have to write it in a different language to run on an Android. So that's really the key differences, and you can just kind of find out there what's available for those different platforms. So that's out there. And I think, look, we've been using at our office the Microsoft Surface, which is Microsoft's tablet, which is sort of the iPad competitor. There's a pro version and a non-pro version. We've been using the non-pro because that's more kind of in line with what the iPad does. A pro is basically like a laptop, and we love it. I mean, it's just been great for kind of note-taking and traveling around. It's got full Word and Excel and PowerPoint, so it's been great. And from a business perspective, the Surface has been awesome. It lacks a lot of the apps, the non-business apps that people like, you know. So if you like to change your TV channel by using the Comcast app, right, on your iPad, they don't have that for the Surface, as an example.
Good. There was somebody that mentioned, you know, that's why we can't get I can't get a straight 2x4 anymore at my home center. So you answered that question for somebody here. If you could, we'll see if another question or two, but if not, here's a last question for you. When it comes to some of the data-driven, you know, business decisions, if you could talk just a little bit more, maybe an example or two, if you think of one of the clients, or even, you know, within IT Direct, of how, you know, data that maybe you used to not have access to, not be able to see. Not a term you use a lot is not be able to, oh, no, I'm missing the term, but to be able to visualize it, right? To be able to see it, to have clarity on it. What is an example or two of how that data has really impacted business decisions you're making, or your ability to evaluate employees or productivity? Can you just speak to a couple examples just to kind of hammer home that point?
Sure. So I mean, here's one thing, right? And this has been a real boon for us. So, you know, we operate on delivering service to clients, so we want to have a certain level of billable time on our technicians, right? So we understand, right, looking at the whole year, you know, how much time we need to bill to be able to cover our bills and, you know, keep people paid, and so forth. But, you know, it's important that the person themselves knows where they stand, right? Because you don't want to always have to be on top of them to do this or do that. And so what we've been able to do is we've generated an ability with a simple little interface where every single person every day can see where they are on billable time against goal. And so you can tell someone, look, your goal is going to be 34 billable hours a week on average. So if you want to know where that stands, right, if real time, being able to look at it, and allows people to kind of manage and motivate themselves. And what's really cool is the ability to show that, like publicly post how people are doing. A competition sort of environment develops where people want to do more because now everyone knows what everyone's doing. And amazingly, we can see that people are already doing more without having to like manage it, right? And I don't have to worry about blocking Facebook and worrying if people are on Twitter or who's on their cell phone at lunch or walking outside to talk to their wife or husband or whatever, because the numbers speak for themselves. And so it just makes management so much easier. But we couldn't do that if we didn't have the data.
Right.
Like it's all about the data, right? So that's great. And then the other piece I'd say on a much simpler level that we were able to, that's something, by the way, that took us a while to get to, but something we were able to do immediately was by having a system that everybody inputs their time as they work, we can keep an eye on project budgets much closer. Right? So the way our system works is you create these like milestones on a project. And so every time you work on it, you sort of log what you did against our project plan. And so if I notice that by the time we get to this milestone, we should still have 60% of our time available. If we have less than 60%, it will alert the project manager that we've hit, you know, in other words, we got to this point on the project, but we used too much time. So now it's not like the old days where, holy cow, we're at the end of the project. We still have 20 hours to do on the project, but there's only 5 hours left in the budget.
It's getting rid of the surprises. It's helping.
Right, and if we know farther in advance, right, Kyle, I can actually adjust.
Yes.
So if I know I got a 100-hour project, and at 40% done with the project, I'm 50% done with my time. Okay, we got to huddle up real quick. Where can we make back some of this time, or at least stop the bleeding? Right? And so real-time information like that is so important.
I think those are great examples. And I think a lot of people can find that to be applicable in their business as well. Well, very good.
I just want to add one thing. It was just the key, by the way, was not adding additional systems. The key was finding a system that worked inside of our existing workflow.
Sure. And somebody just asked, are you using MS Project for this type of management?
No, we're not. We use so we went and did the research I talked about, and we went and found a series of applications that were designed for the IT industry. So we have an integrated system that does project management, support ticketing, it does lead generation. So, I mean, the whole thing, right? So whether you're in our business development department, in billing, service delivery, all the way through there, it's all in one system. And so we did that research up front. We found some different products. We investigated them, that kind of whole process, and made the decision. And I think it's a good idea because it's a huge commitment, huge.
Sure.
Dollars and time.
One more question that just popped through, if you can give your 2 cents on this. If you could compare the Microsoft Surface to the Dell tablet, any thoughts on that?
Which Dell tablet? Is there a specific Dell tablet?
No, there's not.
I don't know. I mean, if whoever that is, just shoot us an email on the contact us, and I'd be happy to just talk to you about it directly. I mean, the Dell tablets, just briefly so everyone can get this part of it, but the Dell tablets, I believe, for most of them that I'm aware of, they're running the full operating system, so it's really more like a stripped-down computer. And the issue there is the benefit, right, is they can run more applications, but the downside is they don't run them as well. And I think the genius of the iPad, right, and then the Android tablet and the Kindle Fire is it's a limited universe, right? You can't just take your iPad and install QuickBooks as an example. You can't install like Photoshop, right? There's a Photoshop Lite you can download from the App Store, but it's specifically designed for the iPad so that with a stripped down amount of memory, with a stripped down processor, it still runs speedily. And that's what the Surface does for Microsoft. But I think the form factor makes more sense. The keyboard's so much better. And the ability to actually do work on it is so much better. So when I travel now, I just went on a business training trip to last week for 3 days. I don't even bring a laptop anymore. I can do everything from my Surface. So
yeah. I don't know if everybody caught that, but did you just make up a word speedily, or is that an actual word?
I don't know, but I have been known to make up words, so it easily could be made up. Yeah.
Well, very good. Well, thank you all for spending an hour of your Friday with us. Have a wonderful weekend. We appreciate you guys dialing in. And if you have any questions at all, contact us at gettingyouconnected.com. That's actually an email that'll go specifically to Ari and I. And we will also get a recording of this webinar out to you in case you want to share it with some of your team. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, guys.